Frau Bundeskanzlerin,
Madam Chancellor,
I think you have given us a lot of courage and, if I speak as a European, a lot of reasons for optimism. We have now the opportunity to have a discussion with you, and I would like to ask my colleagues to join us here at the podium. And I would use this opportunity first to thank again the Federal President Leuenberger for his words of bienvenue and for his speech. And I would like to ask Michael Dell, Chairman and founder of Dell, to join us, Mr. Hank McKinnell. Mr. Hank McKinnell, who is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Pfizer, the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, and Mr. Peter Brabeck-Letmathe, who is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Nestlé. Michael, may I first ask you to share with us your reaction, and certainly you have also a question for the Chancellor.
Yes, Madam Chancellor, it's wonderful to hear about the ideas you have to improve German competitiveness. And I come to you from the perspective of the part of the German computer industry which is growing. Having ourselves increased our human resources, our headcount in Germany last year by 50%, and having made a commitment to grow a major new site in East Germany, in Halle. So my question is, with the accelerating pace of progress in Asia, in China and India, does that increase the sense of urgency for the changes in Germany and in Europe?
Ja, ich bin der festen Überzeugung, dass wir uns die Dringlichkeit der Veränderung nicht aussuchen können.
that we have no choice about this urgency of change in a global world. This question of how fast one has to change is one of relative movement. If others change faster than we do, it's no use thinking that we are already changing very fast. And that is also something that we have to make people understand in Germany. People have subjective feelings. They believe subjectively that there has been a lot of change. I'm the Chancellor of the whole of Germany, but I'm very pleased about this because I come from the new Bundesländer, and I'm very pleased if you want to invest in that part of Germany. One of the very interesting features of German reunification has been that thanks to this reunification, a lot of people have learned that change is interesting and advantageous despite the difficulties. But for most, this reunification was an unexpected change. I myself had not expected that I would be able to live in a free society before I reached the age of retirement. So this whole process of German reunification has to be used to promote this willingness to accept change. In the older Bundesländer, there's a special sense of ownership and the belief that these kind of ownership conditions cannot or should not change. But in the new Bundesländer, this is slightly different. So anyway, welcome to Halle.
what would be your advice or your question to the Chancellor?
Ja, zunächst einmal, Frau Bundeskanzlerin.
Well, first of all, Madam Chancellor, I would like to thank you very much for your speech, because it's one that gives us hope and trust, and it's something that we really, all of us, need. 3 weeks before the election, I had the privilege of meeting with you privately, and at the time you told me that you had 4 priorities in your program. One was, if I remember correctly, simplification of the tax system, making the labor market more flexible, restructuring of the social networks, and fourthly, a greater openness to innovation. And this is something you've said yourself. But the only difference between what you told me then and what you said today were these 3 words of a lot of, or many small steps. So my question is, given this gigantic program you have taken on, do you think that these many small steps will suffice? And will you have enough time to actually implement them, take them? Answer. Well, if they all go in the same consistent direction and not have a to and fro kind of route, then it should be okay. It's no secret that we are a coalition of 2 parties with very different social programs. There's no secret about that. And I'm the Chancellor of this entire government, and I'll come back to the 4 points you mentioned. First of all, innovation is something that we will be able to take on very well. It'll be well resolved. We've accepted this as a clear objective, and we'll discuss this with the German industry and economy to see how it can be implemented. For €1 in the civil service and the public sector, we need €2 in the private sector, which means that the industry and the economy have to also make their own contribution. Now, the question of reforming the social systems, we've already taken some very interesting and honest steps regarding the pension systems, and we'll continue to do so. We'll have to adopt all sorts of legal provisions to extend the retirement age. That is something that all the experts have recommended. We have an immense job to do in the public health system. It's important because we have the problem of additional costs connected with the labor market. The health system is a big growth market. People need more security. The growth potential may not be curtailed. We have to have freedom for growth as well. These are one of the major projects this year, and if we meet again next year, I'll be able to tell you whether I'm satisfied with the results or not, and that's a big piece of our work. We will certainly do something about corporate tax this year as well, especially with regard to the small-sized enterprises. We need rules and regulations that are going to be better in terms of competition, and we need to pull together here rather than work in opposition in order to achieve this. Probably the greatest discussion will arise on the following topic, and that is on labor law. And I had really hoped for more than has been achieved so far. Because every job is different, we need many small solutions that will give us this freedom. We have reached collective wage bargaining agreements, which are very, very good, with a lot of flexibility, but things are moving very slowly, unfortunately. And sometimes I'm very concerned about this. Sometimes I wonder whether we are moving fast enough. Because a job that is lost or is not invested in is one that you cannot prove why it was lost, why it disappeared, and you can have long and lengthy political discussions about it. Hank McKinnell?
Your reaction.
Well, Chancellor, very positive. It's a tone that is frankly overdue in Germany and Europe, and I hope you can lead this not only in Germany but throughout Europe. The spirit of Davos this year is the creativity imperative. So within that spirit, let me ask your reaction to two possibly creative solutions to the problem of employment. First, the problem of employment of the young, and secondly, the problem of employment of the old. You mentioned global competition, you mentioned the importance of innovation and knowledge-based jobs, and that's certainly correct. You certainly advocate reducing taxation, reducing regulation, all of which is part of the solution. But maybe the creativity part is to add to that formula reward, to recognize that innovation does not occur in government, in universities, in companies. It's created by people, and people respond better to rewards than almost anything else. So make it okay to be rewarded for your invention. Secondly, the quote, problem of the old. I find it very interesting that people in Europe retire very early. Those in the labor force over age 60 are 27% in the United States, 12% in Germany, and 7% in France, but I won't comment on that. But it does appear that we think of the problem of the old as a zero-sum game. And when people retire early, they depend on the state for pensions and for health care. It would seem to me a creative alternative might be to reverse the formula and to recognize that if we invest in health, if we hold the Ministry of Health accountable not just for reducing the cost of sickness, but creating wellness and allow people to continue in jobs, then people earn incomes and pay taxes rather than being dependent on the state for receiving money. So I kind of think in these two areas, the current thinking is not working. And maybe the creative impairment says we ought to reframe the problem and think of a new solution.
Also wenn ich es richtig verstehe.
Well, if I understand you correctly, then you were raising this issue of how long people stay in the labor market. And in Germany, people would prefer to work longer, not every day, but in their life for more years. We now have a different type of industrial job, different processes, different production systems, and we've solved this problem by letting people retire much earlier. And this is a great change, and at such a time of great change, there is a risk that certain age groups will be hit hardest. But in any case, we should not and may not accept that in an aging society, which after all is quite a gratifying phenomenon to see that the older people can retire earlier. But because of these highly accelerated production cycles, we have to be a little more acquainted with these cycles. When we evaluate labor, those who earn more easily are not necessarily the ones who are then kept longest because of their age. Everything that is routine, experience of life, the abilities of being able to resolve problems because of one's experience, this is something that we have to rely much more on in the future. And what you call diversity in the United States is being neglected terribly in Germany and in Europe when it comes to gender, age, ethnic origin. Secondly, I think we also have to reflect on the following. Our societies need to entrust more tasks to those who are older and who have something to contribute, not necessarily in a remunerated way, but in all areas, including urban planning and social housing, if we want to do something about this democratic and demographic change On the other hand, when it comes to the younger people in Germany, we have to make sure that the education they get at school and at university actually coincides with what is required later on when they have a job. We have a lot of social waste when it comes to the older age groups, and this is something that we have to resolve. It may not become a consistent phenomenon.
Or a question which I would like to see more in the foreign policy area or European area. I don't know who of my colleagues here would like to raise a question in this respect.
Meine Frage wäre eigentlich,
Well, my question really links up with the topics that have been mentioned. In your speech, you spoke about the old working virtues, the old German working virtues. I recently saw some statistics and I brought them along, and the question was put, is hard work a quality, a virtue which should be taught children today? And the answer was that in Denmark, 2% of the population said yes, and in Germany it's 23%. In the United States, 61%, and in China, 86%. I beg your pardon, 68%. It's an excellent question, I think, that you have raised, because a lot of what you want to achieve and will be able to achieve, I think, will depend very much on whether you can get this change of attitude or bring it back. And I think that is going to be the crux of what you will be able to achieve. Answer: well, I'm glad to see that we are not the caboose in Europe. I'm very happy about that. But it would be interesting to see what the answer would have been in Eastern Germany, or the eastern part of Germany and the western part of Germany, where there would be a difference there. I think all of the industrialized countries in Europe have a big problem. We have been successful in the past, and we believe that this success can be enshrined in legislation for all times. And even the best political party in the world will be unable to do so, to lay this down in law. But we should not accept the theory either that, first of all, we have to do very poorly before we can do better again. And for me, the key is education, curiosity, inquisitiveness. Push the frontiers, the borders of what you are able to do further and further. And this has to be in all types of subjects that are taught: sports, mathematics, the human sciences. We have to create such a social climate in which we push these borders ever further. And if we have a very good basis on which to start, then we can grow and build on education. We have to increase this intensity, the possibilities of what we can learn, what we can teach. If we look at what we do in Germany at the very early age, at the toddler's age, how we do not tap the abilities and talents of toddlers, then it is really a great pity that we do not tap into this potential. And we cannot just let families take on the responsibility here. It has to be done elsewhere as well. Otherwise, you will always have whole groups of society who will never be able to benefit from what society has to offer.
By the question of Hank McKinnell. But before ending, Michael, I would like, you are one of the most successful entrepreneurs of this century, and I would like you to give an advice at the end to the Chancellor. What would be your advice from but let's first take up the question of Hank McKinnell.
Well, let's go beyond the economy and business. You recently visited the United States. By all reports, an extremely successful visit. President Bush spoke very warmly of you personally, saying that he called you after your election and observed that you and he share something, which is having won an election by a landslide. What was your impression of the visit, and where do you think America and Germany can work more closely together?
Ich hatte einen sehr positiven Eindruck von meinem
A
Besuch.
very positive impression from my visit for two reasons. First, because there is a need in Germany, following the end of the Cold War, to have a more intensive relationship with the United States, to build up that relationship, which is certainly going to be on a new basis. It's not going to be like during the Cold War. And we have to identify cases where we need to discuss what the basis of our common values is. It isn't simply something which is passed on from generation to generation. What I understand by freedom, what I understand by solidarity, what importance do I attach to international institutions, how do I intend to behave? These are all things which we need to discuss with each other. They are not givens in a world which is undergoing dramatic change. And the first question I was asked in the Senate at a breakfast, and it was whether more research shouldn't be done in the information area, and is there a tension or a frustration between U.S. and America? These and other kinds of issues need to be discussed, and there are sometimes going to be critical discussions. But I was happy to see that this need is recognized on the American side as well. It is a process of give and take. Sometimes one gets the impression in Europe that we are not mutually dependent, that nobody needs any partners. But my impression from this visit is that this would be a false impression, and that there is an awareness also in America that we are dependent on each other, that we need to deal with each other, facing the new threats to security and so on. And as to the question how we can how we can reconcile economic development and our basic values, that is certainly a very important issue.
Peter, Michael.
Yeah, you spoke about the need to have reforms in the labor market, and we certainly agree with that. Again, as a perspective of an employer which is growing, but more broadly, I think Germany and other countries in Europe face the issue where a person can earn the same amount of money by not working as they are by working. And it seems to me that if this is advice or a question, that is a fundamental problem which cannot be addressed, in a one immediate change, but has to gradually be addressed and has to change.
Mit Sicherheit. Ich habe heute
No question. One of his maxims were frequently that somebody who works should have more than if he doesn't work. And you have to have more when you work, if you work than if you don't. And this principle isn't always applied in Germany. That means there's no real incentive. And for that reason, it has to be one of the central problems. The justified expectation of security and of a basic living standard, that has to be reconciled with the attractiveness of the job situation. And this is one of the major tasks of the coalition is going to be, and this is going to be a difficult discussion too, as to whether we can, if we neglect this principle, how many jobs are we going to give up? Are we going to sacrifice by failing to apply this principle? This is a growth area and certainly one which throws up many problems. Good advice, certainly. Madam Federal Chancellor, in our discussion, unfortunately, we're coming to the end, so that we'll have the opportunity later on to hear the Vice Premier of the People's Republic of China. You also mentioned China, but I would, in conclusion, like to put a question to you. You said in your address that you laid great stress on the ethical issues, the ethical dimension. And my closing question to you, and this is perhaps a somewhat personal question, I'd like to ask what are the three values which you, not in your policies as Federal Chancellor, but you personally, what are the three values which you regard as most significant in the further shaping of your policy? Answer, perhaps one experience I'm not likely to forget, because it's one of the reasons why I became a politician, and that is the fact that I had the opportunity to experience freedom, and I've experienced something which I didn't expect. I never reckoned with that my whole life would change. And from that arose a faith, a belief that one can experience the unexpected again and again, and there is a cost-benefit calculation, of course, but you shouldn't apply that to every step, because something unexpected can come. And if you weigh everything up before you move, that's not my maxim. It's not the way I do things. Then the second would be, I come from a party, I belong to a party whose fundamental principle is the Christian idea, and we now see ourselves facing the challenge that what we have accepted for every individual in Germany and in Europe, that if this is to be taken seriously, that has to apply, these Christian values have to apply to every human being on earth. And we have to be clear in our minds that the others have to have a larger share in development than has previously been the case. And this is the fulfillment of what we've always wanted for ourselves. And if we were to isolate ourselves, to close ourselves off, to withdraw, that would be absolutely the wrong response. And it would erode our whole alleged ethical foundation. And this, from this emerges, for me, the task that I probably can't be. I don't suppose I shall be satisfied with the way the world is in my lifetime. Okay, well, that was only two principles. And perhaps out of those two, I've produced a third by conviction.
Frau Bundeskanzler,
Madam Chancellor, very, very warm thanks for having joined us today, and thanks also to the colleagues from the Foundation Board of the World Economic Forum.